he actually survives or provides his own food. Dog in America, the food comes to him. So the dog doesn't have to work for food.
It was a brisk autumn morning in New York City when Cesar Millan, the world-renowned dog whisperer.
Who you are in the animal world is energy. So when I worked with Oprah, the dog didn't know that that was Oprah Winfrey.
Was walking to a television studio for an interview about his latest book. Dressed in a tailored jacket and carrying a coffee, he blended in with the stream of professionals hurrying along the bustling sidewalks of Manhattan. As he approached the corner of Fifth Avenue, a weathered hand reached out from a doorway. "Excuse me, sir. Can you give me $1? The voice was quiet, almost apologetic, a stark contrast to the city's usual cacophony. Cesar paused, turning to face the man who had spoken. Most passers-by would have continued walking, perhaps mumbling an excuse or simply pretending not to hear. Some might have dropped $1 in the man's cup before hurrying on their way, conscience momentarily soothed. But Cesar Millan did something that stopped pedestrians in their tracks, and would later become a story shared thousands of times across social media. The homeless man was perhaps in his 60s, though hardship had aged his face beyond his years. His clothes were worn but clean, his gray beard neatly trimmed despite his circumstances. Most notably, sitting beside him was a medium-sized brown dog with gentle eyes and a graying muzzle, its leash carefully tied to the man's wrist. "What's your name?" Cesar asked, crouching down to the man's eye level. Surprise flickered across the man's face at being addressed directly. "James," he answered after a moment. "James Wilson." "I'm Cesar," he replied, extending his hand. As they shook hands, Cesar nodded toward the dog. "And who's this?" "This is Duke," James said, his voice warming with pride. "Been with me for 9 years now. Found him as a pup in an alley, abandoned. Guess we saved each other." Cesar studied the dog with his expert eye. Despite James's difficult circumstances, Duke appeared well-fed, his coat relatively clean, his demeanor calm and balanced. This was not a neglected animal. "May I?" Cesar asked, gesturing toward Duke. James nodded, and Cesar held out his hand for the dog to sniff. Duke investigated briefly, then pushed his head against Cesar's palm, asking for affection. A sign of a well-socialized, trusting dog. "He's healthy," Cesar observed. "You've taken good care of him." "Duke eats before I do," James said simply. "Always." A small crowd had begun to gather, some recognizing the famous dog behaviorist, others simply curious about the well-dressed man having a conversation with a homeless person. Cesar seemed oblivious to the attention as he scratched behind Duke's ears. "How long have you been on the streets, James?" 3 years, James replied. "Used to be a carpenter, had my own business. Then my wife got sick, cancer. Insurance didn't cover much. Lost everything paying the medical bills. She passed anyway." His voice cracked slightly. "Duke's all I got left." Instead of immediately reaching for his wallet, Cesar asked another unexpected question. "What time did you and Duke have breakfast this morning?" James looked confused. "Haven't yet. Usually hit the coffee shop dumpster around noon when they throw out the morning pastries." Cesar checked his watch, then stood up. "I have an interview in an hour. Would you and Duke join me for breakfast first?" The small crowd murmured in surprise. James looked equally stunned. "You want to have breakfast? With me?" "Yes," Cesar said simply. "There's a dog-friendly cafe 2 blocks from here. They make excellent eggs. Duke looks like he could use some protein, and so could you." "But why?" James asked, genuine confusion in his voice. Cesar's answer was straightforward. "Because Duke has shown me the kind of man you are. He's calm, respectful, trusting. Dogs don't lie about their humans. If Duke is balanced, it means you have maintained your dignity and discipline despite your circumstances." Some onlookers had their phones out now, recording the exchange. Cesar either didn't notice or didn't care.
My relationship with Mother Nature has no anxiety, no fear, no tension, no nervousness. It's no past or future. It's just in the now.
"So, breakfast?" he asked again. James hesitated, then nodded, gathering his few possessions into a worn backpack. As they walked toward the cafe, Duke trotting between them, Cesar asked about James's carpentry skills, listening intently to the man's passionate description of furniture he had once crafted. At the cafe, the hostess initially hesitated when she saw James, but quickly composed herself when she recognized Cesar. They were seated at a quiet corner table on the patio, where Duke could lie comfortably at their feet, over eggs, toast, and coffee. Cesar learned more about James, his 3 decades as a craftsman, his marriage of 28 years to his high school sweetheart Helen, his expertise in restoring antique wooden furniture. "I still pick up odd jobs when I can," James explained. "Enough to keep Duke and Kibble and me in, well, whatever's available." He looked down, embarrassment crossing his features. "Never thought I'd end up here." "Life can change direction in a moment," Cesar observed. "It's how we adapt that defines us." As they finished their meal, Cesar made a phone call. The conversation was brief, but when he hung up, he was smiling. "James, I have a proposition for you," Cesar said. "I have a ranch in California where I rehabilitate dogs. The property needs constant maintenance, including some custom wooden structures for the dog training areas. I've been looking for someone with carpentry skills." James stared at him. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a fresh start," Cesar clarified. "Salary, housing on the property, and of course, room for Duke. In exchange, I get your expertise in wood and craftsmanship." "But you don't know me," James protested. "I could be anyone." Cesar glanced down at Duke, who had remained calm and well-behaved throughout the meal. "I know enough. Duke vouches for your character, and I'm a good judge of energy, in dogs and in people." "Why would you do this for a stranger who asked you for $1? James asked, his voice catching. Cesar's answer was simple, yet profound, because 20 years ago, I crossed the border into this country, with nothing but the clothes on my back. I was homeless too, sleeping in alleys, washing cars for quarters. Someone saw potential in me beyond my circumstances and gave me a chance. Today, I'm just continuing that chain of kindness. The job offer came with one condition. James would need to complete a 90-day rehabilitation program to address the depression that had settled over him since his wife's death. Cesar would arrange everything. "This isn't charity," Cesar emphasized. "I need skilled hands at the ranch, but I need those hands to be steady, and the mind behind them to be clear." By the time Cesar left for his interview, arrangements had been made for James and Duke to stay at a pet-friendly hotel until travel to California could be organized. The small crowd of onlookers had dispersed, but not before the story had begun spreading on social media. What these posts couldn't capture, however, was the moment back at the street corner when James had gathered his few possessions. He had pulled a small wooden box from his backpack, a box he'd carved himself during better days. Inside was a single photograph of a smiling woman holding a puppy. "My Helen," he had explained to Cesar, and Duke when he was small enough to fit in her hands. In that moment, Cesar understood that his impulse had been correct. This man hadn't lost his dignity or his capacity for care, despite losing everything else. The real miracle wasn't what Cesar offered James that morning. It was what James had managed to preserve within himself during 3 years on the streets. 6 months later, visitors to Cesar's Dog Psychology Center would admire the beautifully crafted wooden agility equipment, custom dog houses, and intricate fencing that transformed the training areas. And if they arrived at just the right time, they might spot an older man with a neatly trimmed beard walking the grounds with a graying brown dog and the world's most famous dog trainer, deep in conversation about their next project. Sometimes, the most profound response to a request for $1 isn't the money at all. It's the recognition of the inherent worth in another human being when the rest of the world has looked away.
Very aggressive dog. On top of that, she's a German Shepherd. On top of that, she's a very large girl. She's a big girl. So it's easier to assume that she's an aggressive dog, but it's actually very insecure. She just doesn't have the proper leadership.
Cesar Millan was used to dogs approaching him. As the world-famous dog whisperer, his calm, assertive energy naturally drew canines to him wherever he went. But on a crisp morning in Los Angeles, as he walked through a neighborhood where he was scheduled to work with a family's aggressive German Shepherd, Cesar noticed something unusual, a tiny black and white puppy trailing behind him on the sidewalk. At first, he thought nothing of it. Strays were common in this part of the city, and the puppy would likely wander off. But after 3 blocks, the small dog was still following faithfully, maintaining a perfect distance of about 5 feet, close enough to stay connected, but far enough to show respect. It was the kind of natural dog behavior that Cesar had observed thousands of times in balanced packs. When Cesar stopped, the puppy stopped too, sitting down immediately and looking up at him with expectant brown eyes. The dog couldn't have been more than 3 months old, its ribs visible beneath a dull coat, ears too large for its tiny head. Despite its obvious hunger and neglect, there was something special in its demeanor. a calm dignity unusual in such a young, abandoned animal. Most people would have shooed the stray away, or perhaps called animal control. Others might have taken a quick photo, given the puppy a pat, and continued on their way. But Cesar Millan's response to this silent follower would set in motion a series of events that would touch the hearts of millions around the world. "You're quite the follower, aren't you?" Cesar said, crouching down to the puppy's level. The little dog maintained its sitting position, but its tail swept once across the concrete. A subtle acknowledgement. Cesar reached out slowly, allowing the puppy to sniff his hand. There was no fear in the animal's body language, no cowering or submission signals that would indicate past abuse. Just quiet observation and what almost looked like hope. "Where's your pack?" Cesar asked softly, noticing the absence of a collar. The puppy tilted its head, those oversized ears flopping slightly. Checking his watch, Cesar realized he was running early for his appointment. Making a quick decision, he gently scooped up the puppy, noting how lightweight it felt in his hands. Up close, he could see it was a female, probably part border collie from the distinctive markings, mixed with something smaller. "Let's get you some water at least," he said, tucking the puppy into the crook of his arm. She settled there immediately, as if she'd been waiting for precisely this invitation. At a nearby convenience store, Cesar purchased water and a protein bar. Outside, he poured some water into the cap and held it for the puppy, who drank eagerly but neatly, without splashing or grabbing. Another sign of her unusual temperament. He broke off small pieces of the protein bar, which she took delicately from his fingers. "You've got manners, little one," Cesar observed. "Someone taught you something before you ended up on the street." As Cesar continued toward his appointment, the puppy trotted beside him now, no longer trailing behind. Passers-by smiled at the sight of the famous dog trainer and his tiny companion, some stopping to take pictures with their phones. "Just found her," Cesar explained to a curious woman who asked if the puppy was his new dog. "She's been following me for blocks." "She chose you," the woman said with a knowing smile. "Dogs always know the right people." When Cesar arrived at his client's home, he explained the situation and asked if the puppy could wait in their backyard during the session. The family agreed immediately, enchanted by the little stray. "What are you going to do with her?" the client asked. "I'm not sure yet," Cesar replied honestly. "Let me work with your dog first, then I'll figure it out." Throughout the 2-hour session with the family's German Shepherd, Cesar found himself glancing into the backyard where the puppy had settled calmly on a patio chair, watching the training with attentive eyes. She hadn't made a sound, no whining, no barking, just patient observation. After successfully helping the family establish new boundaries with their dog, Cesar went out to the yard. The puppy immediately jumped down from the chair and sat at his feet, looking up expectantly. "You're something special, aren't you?" Cesar murmured. Making another quick decision, he turned to the family. "Do you know of any veterinarians nearby?" An hour later, at a local animal hospital, the puppy sat calmly on the examination table as the veterinarian checked her over. "No microchip," the vet confirmed. "She's about 12 weeks old, undernourished but not critically. No signs of disease. Someone abandoned her recently. She hasn't been on the streets long."
So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna continue touching him, so that way he loses his fear of people touching him, so when I bring him back to the owners, it's safe.
"What do you recommend?" Cesar asked. The vet gave him a knowing look. "Well, she needs food, vaccines, a warm place to sleep, and someone who understands her exceptional temperament." She paused. "She's not an ordinary stray, Mr. Millan. I've worked with rescue dogs for 15 years, and I rarely see this kind of balanced energy in a puppy, especially one that's been abandoned." Cesar nodded thoughtfully. He had already sensed the same thing. "I can call the shelter," the vet offered, though with her being black and white, not a puppy mill breed. She didn't finish the sentence, but Cesar understood the implication. Black dogs, even puppies, were often overlooked at shelters, their adoption rates significantly lower than other colors. "That won't be necessary," Cesar said, his decision made. "I'll take care of her." By the time Cesar brought the puppy, now bathed, vaccinated, and wearing a new collar, to his dog psychology center, word had already spread among his staff. His social media team had posted a single photo of the puppy following him down the sidewalk, captured by a passerby who recognized him. The post was rapidly gathering thousands of comments and shares. "What are you going to name her?" asked Cesar's son, Andre, who had come immediately to meet the new arrival. Cesar watched as the puppy explored her new surroundings, not with the frantic energy of most puppies, but with methodical curiosity, checking in with him visually after investigating each new area. Sombra, Cesar decided. It means shadow in Spanish, because she followed me like my shadow. As days turned into weeks, Sombra thrived at the center. Her natural intelligence made training effortless, and her calm energy had an unexpected effect on even the most troubled dogs in Cesar's rehabilitation program. He began incorporating her into sessions with aggressive dogs, amazed at how her presence often diffused tension. What Cesar hadn't anticipated was how Sombra's story would resonate with his audience. The initial social media post had gone viral, and when Cesar shared updates on Sombra's progress, the response was overwhelming. People connected deeply with the image of the tiny stray who had the wisdom to choose Cesar Millan of all people to follow. "She recognized something in you," one commenter wrote. "Animals know energy better than humans do." When Cesar included Sombra in an episode of his show 3 months later, the ratings broke records. Viewers were captivated by the sight of the once starving stray, now healthy and glossy-coated, working alongside Cesar with dogs 3 times her size, demonstrating a natural ability to communicate with troubled canines. "She's not just my pet," Cesar explained to the camera. "Sombra has become my partner. She recognizes imbalance in other dogs before even I do sometimes." The letters and emails poured in, stories from people inspired by Sombra to adopt black dogs from shelters, accounts of how watching her transformation had given them hope during their own difficult times. 1 year after the day when a tiny puppy decided to follow him down a Los Angeles sidewalk, Cesar sat in his backyard, watching Sombra gently guiding a newly rescued dog through its first interaction with his pack. Her working instincts had developed beautifully, confirming his early suspicions about her border collie heritage. But it was her extraordinary emotional intelligence that had made her invaluable both personally and professionally. "You know," Cesar said to the camera crew filming for his upcoming special, "we often think we rescue animals. We adopt them, feed them, give them homes. But the truth is, sometimes they rescue us." He reached down to stroke Sombra's head as she returned to his side. Mission accomplished with the new dog. "This little shadow reminded me of something I teach but sometimes forget to practice, that the deepest connections don't come from force or even intention. They come from recognition, one soul recognizing another." Sombra looked up at him, then pressed against his leg in silent agreement. She had followed him that day for a reason neither of them fully understood, but both could feel. And in doing so, she hadn't just found a home, she had found her purpose. Sometimes the greatest journeys begin with the smallest steps, or in Sombra's case, the smallest pause, following faithfully behind a human who needed her as much as she needed him.